and welcome to our session, Balancing the Narrative on the Active Managers Council. This is an Investment Advisor Association initiative, and I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers today. Bill Roberts from GW&K Investment Management, Kevin Lyman from Invesco, and Apurva Schwartz from Harding Loevner, and we'll go into their backgrounds a little bit more as we go. I want to start by just talking about the basics. Why did we create the Active Managers Council? To put it simply, Investment Advisor Association members recognized the need. They saw what was happening out there in the discussion about active and passive management. They believed that the discussion had become very one-sided. There was a focus on active being lower cost and therefore better, and active in the aggregate underperforming. And there are a lot of myths and misunderstandings out there about active management, including the false dichotomy of active versus passive. So this slide gives some examples of the dramatic headlines that we frequently see, all with a very negative spin on active management. This negative take is most visible in the media, but the media coverage has shaped the conversation within our industry and really got imprinted. And policymakers have bought into some of that narrative with attempts to favor passive over active in retirement and other legislation. Next slide, please. So to address this imbalance, about 5 years ago, a group of IAA members formed the Active Managers Council. It is a pretty diverse group in terms of business backgrounds and business models and types of investors. But what they all have in common is really wanting to make sure that folks understand that both active and passive are important, and really get away from that imbalanced narrative. We created 2 membership options, a steering committee option and an at-large member option, which are both still available today. And I'll note that our panelists today are all on the steering committee of the Active Managers Council. What I think is really important here is that members felt that they could influence the conversation. They didn't feel powerless in the face of what was happening, and they came together to really think about how they could make a difference, and they really have. And so I just want to encourage everyone listening today to think about how they can take action and make a difference here. The mission of the council is to balance the narrative in the marketplace about active and passive, to engage with policymakers to level the playing field, and to provide media, influencers, and thought leaders and other market participants with accurate, compelling research, data, and content on active and passive management. Really arm them with content, messaging, background, research, so that they can go out and tell a balanced story about what's happening out there. The council has 4 core messages. We have variations on the theme here, but we try to develop consistent messaging so that these messages really imprint in the media with policymakers. There's a lot of study out there that folks can really only absorb 3 to 5 messages, and that's particularly true in the media and with policymakers. A lot is being thrown at them. So we're really focused. Active management adds value. All investors are active investors, right? There's really a spectrum here of active management, but every decision, even the decision to use passive, involves active decision making. So really all investors are active investors. Active and passive are both critical to investors, but they play different roles. And active management is crucially important to the global markets. It's important to market efficiency. Without active managers, we don't have markets. And that's an important point, particularly with policymakers. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Apurva to talk more about how we promote this messaging out there in the marketplace. Apurva is a portfolio specialist at Harding Loevner, and on the Active Managers Council, Apurva is a member of the Research Task Force, which contributes to the council's analysis and content creation, and helps inform the council's messaging. She's also an important spokesperson for the council with the media. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Apurva.
All right, thanks, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. So I want to share a little bit about how the council is working to change that conversation on active management that Karen had alluded to at the start of her remarks, really because there's so much of that negative slant that we observe in the press. So we have 4 key approaches, as Karen mentioned. We are trying to respond to inaccurate and misleading coverage. So there are a few ways that we can do that. The council, for example, will write letters to editors about stories that we see as extremely imbalanced. Even if the letters aren't published, we do find that they play a role in helping to sensitize editorial staff and generally try to help them understand that there is a balanced perspective that they could be offering the marketplace. So one example would be in February, we wrote a letter to Ignites Europe about their coverage of an academic study that called active managers fantasists. So we felt strongly about that we should write something about that, and so we did do. We also try to complement letters with proactive outreach to reporters and other media outlets where we try to tell the story of active management in a positive way. And this allows the council to be able to actually start to put some of the key messaging that Karen just described out there in the marketplace. We think it's, perhaps more of a public service with that. In addition to the work that we're doing with the media, we want to make sure there's just in general balanced material out there in the marketplace about active management that investors can read, their advisors can read as well. It's really, when you look back to kind of the canon of work that was in place before the council came in, much of the material that you could find out there was actually written by passive management enthusiasts. So of course, very particular slant introduced by that cohort. So we've taken steps to try to correct that narrative. We've developed a whiteboard explainer video, a what is active management page. Those can be found on the council's website. If you Google, for example, what is active management, the council's page is now the top search result. And we've worked with, for example, the editors of Investopedia to help revise their page in active management to have more balanced definitions and make it more objective. And then we also work with sponsors, including academics, to promote cutting edge research. So the council and the active managers, this group has written or sponsored 8 significant papers, and we also try to promote other authors' work through our newsletter, through our blog and videos. So for example, you can look to see the work we've done with Russ Wormers at the University of Maryland to investigate the impact of active management on the efficiency of public security markets. We've explored survivorship bias, how sustainable investing is an active process. So a variety of different topics, but these things are generally, we think, pretty important to help kind of make sure the narrative out there in the market is a little bit more balanced. Back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Apurva. I do want to note that a lot of our that many of our papers have been cited widely. In particular, we had a paper by Professor Martin Kramers, really busting some myths about active management, showing that active managers are skilled, and there are ways that you can identify them in advance. That paper has been widely cited, and it's a seminal paper for the council and for active management. The paper that we published on sustainable investing was cited by an SEC committee in looking at sustainable investing. It's been cited in a number of places. So we are actively getting the message out there with these papers. We have literature review on market efficiency, which we're updating, which has also been a really great source of research for folks looking to talk about the beneficial impact that active management has in the markets. So this has been a very important and well-received effort. The other thing I wanted to note about Apurva's comment with respect to the press, Even when we don't get our op-eds or letters to the editor published, and we have gotten numerous published, those outreaches to reporters make a difference. They have resulted in further outreach by those reporters to us when issues related to active and passive come up. It has toned down with some reporters, some of the rhetoric they used as we've sensitized them to the language. So those kinds of outreaches have made a difference. I also want to highlight that all of the material that Apurva mentioned is available on the council's website, including a video of Apurva answering 3 questions about active management. Great stuff, and if you want to use it and amplify it, feel free. One of the key audiences for our messaging here is policymakers. And so I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Lyman to discuss the council's advocacy efforts. Kevin is the global head of thought leadership at Invesco. He is also one of the founding members of the council's steering committee and a repeat participant in council webinars. So thank you, Kevin. Kevin, you're on mute.
Doesn't it always just happen? So thank you, Karen. And really, because of the lack of balance that we were talking about earlier in the conversation about active and passive, there's been a lot of work to do for the council on the advocacy front, in Washington, because unfortunately, the regulators and the legislators and their staffs often have a negative view of active management. That's just the reality of it, in part because of the press coverage and whatnot, as we've discussed. So the council is always out there continually monitoring for the situations where that view is affecting proposed regulation and legislation. So, I mean, basically, our view is that policymakers should not be putting their finger on the scale when it comes to any investment approach, whether it's active or passive or value or growth or whatever it might be. Our view is that there should be a level playing field that makes it easy for investors to choose the strategy that they want, that's right for them. So to ensure that happens, we've met proactively with legislators and with regulators to give them an accurate, balanced picture of active management. And we've responded with comments on proposals that sometimes favor one strategy over another. One example is when the DOL came out with their fiduciary and ESG initiatives. We weighed in on that to make sure that the language in the rule and the preamble didn't favor passive investing, and to ensure that fiduciaries are able to consider ESG factors as part of their active strategies. We've also written a lot of strong content on the importance of active to sustainable investing. And in fact, as I think Karen just mentioned, some of that content's been cited by policymakers in discussing these issues by the SEC. So, and then in addition to the regulation and legislation, we're also paying very close attention to what's happening in the courts, especially with regard to fiduciary liability, because there too, we believe that it's investors in those defined contribution plans who are entitled to the level playing field, so they can access active strategies if that's their choice. And unfortunately, there have been some lawsuits in this area that have put fiduciaries on a very sort of cautious footing. So we've developed, the council's developed materials for fiduciaries that explain how considering a wide range of strategies, including active, is consistent with their duty to investors. And we feel this is really particularly important in light of guidebooks that have been published by some other industry groups that, in our view, take an inappropriately negative position on active management. So we're trying to be kind of a balancing voice for that and give those planned fiduciaries some ammunition, as it were, to kind of push back on those arguments and to support their decisions to include active management in their plan lineups. So for those who are interested, by the way, we sponsored a webinar where we had some ERISA experts discussing the legal framework that actually exists, as opposed to, again, some of the views that have been expressed out there that we don't think really provided an accurate picture of what the real fiduciary duties are in this area. So you can, IAA members have free access to that recording as well on the council website, alongside all the other materials that we've talked about. Full disclosure, I was moderator of that webinar, so that was my prior experience on it. But again, I think just in summing up, you're seeing on the slide here a lot of activity on the regulatory and legislative engagement side. It's something that we continue to monitor on a regular basis. It's obviously incredibly important to make sure that that there's a full understanding of the issues there on Capitol Hill and elsewhere. And the council stands ready to help educate folks and to act as a resource, just as we do to investors and others. We want to be a resource for legislators, for regulators, and for their staffs on these issues. And I think increasingly we are viewed that way, which is great to see. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Kevin. And I would note, just to highlight a few of the points that Kevin made. Sometimes when we take our members down to Capitol Hill to talk about active management and to talk about the need for balance with active and passive, and making sure that passive is not baked into legislation, we've heard from members of Congress and their staffs that we're the only ones who have brought these issues up, that they haven't heard these issues from anyone else. And so it's critically important that we're there, and they very much appreciate that we have brought some of these issues to their attention. And in some cases, they haven't even realized that the text of the legislation or the bill has embedded passive right into it. It has not even hit with them. So there have been a number of occasions where we've been able to say, hey, this bill that you're floating would embed this kind of passive for every retirement plan participant in the country forever, right? And what are the implications of that? And they've appreciated our bringing that to their attention, and they've taken those measures out of the bills. I do want to put in a plug for our annual advocacy day. We go down to Capitol Hill in June. We bring our members to meet with their elected representatives, and we talk about a wide range of issues, and active and passive is always an important educational theme of our visits to Capitol Hill. Again, many of them don't know anything about active and passive investing, or really not much about investing at all. They come from different backgrounds, as you might expect. Not all of them are focused on these issues. And our education efforts are critically important so that things are not inadvertently, if you will, embedded into legislation. So just wanted to highlight that. We also bring folks to Capitol Hill separately on separate issues when they arise. If any of you want to talk to your members of Congress about active passive or any adjacent issues, we'd be happy to set up meetings for you with folks on Capitol Hill or at the regulators. That is something that's an important part of this council, and that's access to policymakers and really making a difference there. So thank you, Kevin, for all that. And with that, I'd like to turn to Bill and talk about the impact that the council's work has had and where we go from here. Bill is a partner and co-CEO at GW&K. He is also a founding member and the current head of the council's steering committee. So over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Karen. We're on slide 10 for those following along. And I think the key question for everyone is what impact is the council having? And I'm pleased to report that we believe we've had a significant impact. Since the council's founding, we've been tracking the coverage and the tone of the media on active management. And that's the slide you're looking at here on page 10. The orange bars represent negative coverage, while the green bars represent positive coverage. You'll see there continues to be a fair amount of negative coverage, but the amount of positive coverage has increased significantly since the foundation of the council in 2018. We believe that the council has helped articulate and promote the messaging that supports the increase, the uptick in the positive coverage. Turning to slide 11, we also keep track of media pull-through, which looks at how often our key phrases are used in the media. We've noticed that some of our favorites are picking up traction, such specifically as the false dichotomy, being between active and passive. So again, in this key sort of tracking metric, we see the council's work coming through. Turning to the next slide. Unfortunately, we have our work cut out for us. We haven't had much impact on the amount of negative coverage. A lot of this negative coverage is centered around the performance scorecards, the S&P SPIVA reports, the Morningstar barometer, and these are published twice a year. We believe these reports paint an overly negative picture of the active management's performance. We publish our analysis, but this work will need to get more traction to reduce the amount of negative coverage. It's available on the website, and we encourage you to read up upon what we have and talk it up. Turning to the next slide. So what's ahead in 2023 and the balance of the year in 2024? We've been doing a lot to support some of the key growth areas for our members. We've had a long focus on the critical role that active management plays in ESG investing, and we're extending that message to alternatives. Most recently, we've developed materials for active ETFs. And we have an upcoming webinar on active TVFs coming up at the end of the month. We have speakers from Franklin Templeton, Harvard Capital, Invesco, and it will be moderated by Hannah Glover, the editor of Ignites. It will be a great section, and I hope everyone will tune in for that. As discussed earlier, we have a number of publications in the works, including an overview for financial advisors, an update to our market efficiencies work, and a second installment in our material for planned fiduciaries. Again, all this stuff is or will be on our website. And we continue to advocate for more balanced representation of active management in the media and in the industry at large. Slipping to the next slide. I'd like to encourage everyone to support the work of the council. Look, if we want to go quickly, as this expression says, you go by yourself. If we want to go far, you go with a group of people, and we need everyone's help. There's a few ways that your firm can spread the word about active management. Use our messaging consistently. We need to imprint this messaging in dialogue with investors, with the industry, and with the media. Embed the explainer. You can amplify our messages on social media. You can cite our research, share your thought leadership with us. We'd love to amplify it with our channels, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. And turning to the last slide, the most important thing you can do is you can join us. Again, we need support in all different forms. You can contact any of us on the council to learn about our experience. You can contact Nancy for more information, or just contact the organization, and we'll be happy to discuss our actions and our needs. And with that, I'll turn it back to Karen.
Thank you, Bill. And with that, I would like to invite anyone in the audience to submit Q&A. We have a couple of questions that we'll start with, but feel free to add in your questions. I guess I would like to ask a pretty basic question. Why do we think there's such a bias against active out there? And Apurva, I will start with you on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I ask this question of myself annually, if not quarterly, depending on how my client meetings go. I think part of the reason is because I don't know if every narrative needs a bad guy and they need to find a villain in the conversation or someone to blame. Part of it is also active managers at times do have higher fees than passive management. So everyone sort of looks at, the fees that are paid to be involved in active managers and maybe is they're not happy about that kind of cost that they need to bear to be involved in active management. There are reasons for why those costs make sense. But I think it may be a combination of these things, and maybe it's just a very human thing to want a group or a cohort to blame in a narrative. I like to take a more balanced view, and I think the council has a nice way of putting it, which is, active and passive management are both tools, and the discussion doesn't need to be polarized to be, well, if you love one, you have to hate the other, or vice versa. To me, active management and passive management both have a home in broader portfolios. So I'd like to see that discussion turn to, rather than, what's wrong with active management, to, where is it most efficient, where is it most useful in client portfolios, and let's talk about that.
Thanks, Apurva. Kevin, Bill, and you want to chime in there with any observations?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I agree with everything Apurva said. I think it's a fair question because it certainly is one that we face often. I mean, look, one issue is just how markets have performed, at least until recently. We went through a long run with a sort of rising tide lifting all boats sort of thing, which really favored a lot of these passive strategies. And as Apurva said, they're lower fees, so people think, well, why am I paying more for active management when I can do just as well for a lower cost and whatnot? I think it takes some market stress and volatility and whatnot to remind people of those things. The other thing I would say is it's a kind of a natural evolution, as you would see in any number of scenarios, right? I mean, passive products, if you think about ETFs and whatnot, they're still relatively new. It was, I don't want to say kind of a shiny new toy, but certainly it was a new development. People get very excited about it. They see the very real advantages of these products, and we're at Invesco, we're certainly huge proponents of ETFs. We have a very large and thriving ETF business. So we're all in favor of passive products, of course. But I think there was so much focus on the kind of the new aspects of what they are bringing to the table. As Apurva said, there needs to, oftentimes, especially for in the media, it helps to make it a this versus that story. It's the kind of thing that grabs people's attention, and so it gets framed up that way. I think what it feels to me like now, I'm somewhat sanguine, because I think we're seeing an evolution to where people understand, oh, okay, so we always understood active, or we have for a very long time. Then we sort of incorporated in, okay, here's passive. What is this about? Oh, here's how this is. And as Apurva said, we've now moved to that stage. I hope that we've gotten to the stage where we see, it's a horses for courses, as my British friends like to say, understanding where the value for active management lies, where the value for passive management lies, and understanding that they really should both be deployed by investors to achieve an optimal overall result.
Thanks, Kevin. Anything to add there, Bill?
No, I agree with everything that's said, and I think we're also going up against a couple of players that have a lot of advertising dollars to support their business model, which is sort of counter to this. And we're just trying to play defense sometimes.
Thank you. And I would also, add into along what you were all saying. I think some of these messages, and this is why it's so important to imprint new messages. Some of these messages got imprinted long ago, and things have changed, but the messages have not caught up with them. So, for example, expenses have come way down for active management, but those messages were imprinted long ago. And again, I think there's been a lot of evolution, and it's really important that those older messages are replaced with what's happening today. Along those lines, another question throw out here. How do you think about the role of active management in today's markets, and especially given the current market environment, current concentration? Apurva, want to start again?
I'm happy to start again. I mean, for me, active managers play a crucial role, which is helping to underscore rational price discovery in the markets. Maybe that's a lofty thing, but when you do have dollars from QE or liquidity pumped in the system, I mean, passive products are recipients of some of those flows, and indexes buy stocks or other assets indiscriminately. And so there are reasons for why active managers are important. They help to restore that rational price discovery. They're making decisions from a fundamental perspective, and helping to restore some sense, as opposed to just that sort of rote buying that sometimes occurs with passive indexes. So for me, it is this critical role in the markets of having to help restore that rationality and to re-emphasize the fundamentals, when so much of the trading that goes on in the market has nothing to do with either of those things. So that would be my response.
Thanks, Apurva. Bill, Kevin, anything to add there?
I just think in turbulent markets, it's a key time to have an active manager in your portfolio. And we just need to, sort of highlight that. Again, everything that we've said in the last 10 minutes is we have media looking at old data, and we just need to get the current message up.
Yeah, and yeah, just add on to that. Yes, you mentioned the concentration risk there. This is something that, again, I think people are sort of waking up to on some of these things. They may have thought that these indices that they're in were maybe more broad-based than perhaps they are. If there's concentration, if you look at it from a factor perspective or any number of perspectives, there's maybe some risks that weren't perceived there that are kind of coming to the fore. The other thing, and we've mentioned this a couple of times, but from the sustainability side, and I know that's its own topic these days in the U.S. certainly, but I think it's fair to say that there are still a great many investors, American and otherwise, who have sustainability goals along as part of their investment objectives, and active managers are very well positioned to respond to those needs. Again, it's about providing our clients. I think all of us, Parva, Bill, and I, we're all aligned on one, certainly with trying to deliver our clients what they're looking for, and that's what active managers are very good at: sitting down with clients, understanding what their needs are, what their specific goals are, and then delivering against those sort of tailored objectives.
Thanks, Kevin. One question that we get is, how do you measure the council's results? Bill, I'll start with you and then turn to Kevin and Apurva. How do you see it?
So on an objective basis, we see it in the slides that we showed at the latter end of the presentation, where we're tracking the media on positive and negative reporting, and also our pull-throughs on our phrases that we see cropping up. We also have data points when we meet on the Hill with legislators that are starting to hear our messaging, and they hadn't heard it before. So I think that would show that we're having an impact.
And I'll jump in and say, and this is really, maybe it's not exactly about measurement, but more about how useful I find the council and the work done by the council in my day-to-day role here at Invesco. And what I measure it by the number of times that I'm able to send my colleagues or clients of ours who are looking for information to the council website, or I'll simply take the information off of there and provide it to them. But you mentioned the Kramer study and other things. It's a really wonderful resource to have when it might be a financial advisor who's trying to answer that question that they're getting from one of their clients about, wait, why should I pay more for an active management, or why would I want to choose an active fund over an ETF, a passive ETF, something like that. And to have these resources and to have the talking points and the data, frankly, on some of these things, and to be able to back up rather than just kind of say, speak in generalities, be able to provide, peer-reviewed academic research is a very useful tool. So, one way I measure the impact and the results of that is simply, as I say, the number of times throughout the year that I am going back and directing people to the council.
I would echo both Bill and Kevin's remarks, and in particular, if you work for a firm that has an active management business, it sort of becomes an existential question. You should want to support that part of your business, and so I think Kevin, his points on having the resources available to arm others or even yourself in these discussions I find it to be beyond price, because I do get these questions from our clients all the time in terms of how you deploy prudent use of active risk, and I think the council's messaging does a very nice job of addressing that, and then having that academic lens into this and putting some data and bringing in scholars and people that will do proper studies to explore the efficacy of active management in a variety of different ways lends some credibility to the argument that I think you just can't replicate without this group. So for me, I think it's a very strong foot forward on this path. So I believe the council plays a critical role in that.
Thank you, Apurva. I think those are the questions we've gotten. If anyone in the audience wants to send any further questions, you have another a minute or so to do that. I would like to also point out, in terms of impact, we've really studied two of the primary triggers for bad media coverage, the SPIVA report and the Morningstar barometer. Every time those reports come out, that, except for this last time, which was actually great, they can generate some negative coverage, and we feel that a lot of there are a lot of aspects of those reports that are misleading and are not using the right metrics and are not weighted properly. We've actually spent time pointing out some of the deficiencies in some of these reports and ways of measuring active and passive, and we've had an impact there. We've actually caused some reassessment of that in some of these reports, which is great, and we've enlightened some of the folks in the media about the pitfalls of some of the reports. So I think that's another way that we're having an impact that's important. With that, and seeing no other questions, I would again like to encourage everyone to get involved, use the messaging, join the council, cite our research, tell your colleagues. This is a really important initiative. It's important to get the message of both active and passive right out there. So please get involved. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And with that, I would like to thank Kevin and Bill and Apurva for sharing your insights today with our members. And I will see you next time, hopefully all of you, at our Active ETFs webinar on October 26th, coming right up. Take care, everyone, and have a great afternoon.